Okay. So do we feel ready to let people in?
Sure.
Okay.
On it.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you. And I'm gonna share.
Wow.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our tour of Jewish Afghanistan with scholar Sarah Koplik, author of A Political and Economic History of the Jews of Afghanistan, and Osnat Gad, who is a jewelry designer, community leader, and head of the restoration project for the cemeteries of Jewish Afghanistan. As we let more people in, we will play people in with a Afghan melody of a piyut called Yonati Ziv Yifatech. I would like to introduce Sarah Koplik, who is currently based in New Mexico and is the author of what a lot of we will be pulling from, which is A Political and Economic History of the Jews of Afghanistan, as well as Osnat Gad, who not only is a community leader, but also provided so much of the material and so many of the photographs that you're going to see today.
Thank you so much, Mira. It's such an honor to be speaking with all of you today. This is a wonderful opportunity for us, and we're so grateful to My Jewish Learning for enabling this program today. But before starting, I want to acknowledge that we are in a time of war. Too many families are in mourning. We grieve for the loss of so many lives, for so much potential extinguished. We pray for a time when tranquility may return to the land of our ancestors, when we will finally be able to dwell together in peace as all the children of God, B'Tselem Elohim. Let us take a moment of silence for the lives lost in Israel and Gaza. This tour will be different from ones occurring previously with My Jewish Learning, because we can't just walk through the streets of Kabul live streaming with a cell phone. I am a historian, and my work comes from the archives. My guess is that there will be some questions from audience members that I can't answer. I didn't learn about this community from everyday life. This is why I am so deeply grateful to be joined by Ms. Osnat Gad. She comes from a very old Afghan Jewish family. Osnat was born in Peshawar, Pakistan, just after her family left Afghanistan, and she grew up in Israel. She has worked tirelessly to preserve the Jewish heritage of Afghanistan, both inside of the country and also in Israel and the US. I am very excited for you to hear from her as our tour progresses. But first, let me introduce myself. As you know, my name is Sarah Koplik, and I have a doctorate in Middle Eastern history from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. I have a master's degree in Central Asian Studies, and my thesis looked at Bukharan women's spirituality in Israel. My work was primarily for my doctorate in Western archives. I did not travel to Afghanistan as it was under the Taliban then during the time of my research. I constructed an economic history of the communities through letters that appealed for help, government records and analyses, and formerly top secret files. I looked at records in the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the India Office, the British and French Foreign Ministries, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, Centre de Documentation Juive Contemporaine, both in Paris, and the Central Zionist Archives in Jerusalem. Eventually, my research turned into a book called A Political and Economic History of the Jews of Afghanistan. It focuses on the economic policies leveled against the community in the 1930s and 40s and how that led to its demise. But if we could start now with slide number 3. Great. Where is Afghanistan? Let's take a look at this map. Right now, Afghanistan might seem like quite a remote place, but over 1,000 years ago, it was at the crossroads of the world, the center of commerce, religion, and thought. So many ideas were expressed, ideas that may seem surprising and maybe even risque today. So many peoples of different religions and ethnicities were learning from each other. Buddhism was Afghanistan's majority religion in the 6th century. It was a time when the Bamiyan Buddhas were constructed. The next slide. So here we have a hologram that was displayed in Bamiyan in 2015 as a temporary memorial to the statues that were obliterated in 2001. But this gives you a sense of what the statues looked like all the way back until for 1,400 years. Next slide, please. So what's the environment like? As you can take a look at this map of Afghanistan, 75% of it is mountainous with an average altitude of 6,000 feet, about higher than a mile high. Some of the eastern mountain range includes part of the Himalayas. And as you can see, most of the cities were established in a C curve around the mountain range. Next slide, please. So how did the Jews get to Afghanistan? Jews may have arrived as early as 2,700 years ago, exiled from Eretz Israel by the Assyrians in 720 BCE and the Babylonians in 560 BCE. But the oldest evidence that we have right now comes from Hebrew inscriptions on a stone tablet dated from 752 of the Common Era. The first major settlement in what is now Afghanistan was the city of Balkh, or ancient Bactria. Jews may have lived there for perhaps a little less than 2,000 years until the Mongols arrived. Next slide. So this is the Afghan Geniza. And what happened was in 2013, the National Library of Israel purchased a Geniza. And a Geniza is like a storage place for old papers. Because Jews would not throw away a piece of paper that had the name of God on it. They would just, throw it up in a closet or put it in the attic. That's what happened in Cairo. And this was very common in the Jewish world. But there is a small Geniza that was found probably somewhere in northern Afghanistan. And the records are dated from the 11th century until the very eve of the Mongol invasion in 1220. There are about 250 documents that the library was able to purchase a decade ago. And this record highlights Jewish life on the Silk Road. They describe legal and economic affairs, commercial transactions, debts, and travel plans. One letter is even from a man telling his brother that he is still Jewishly observant. And some of the oldest documents are from the 11th century Abu Netzer family, who is living in Bamiyan at the time. There are also lots of religious texts in Hebrew, Aramaic, Judeo-Persian, as well as documents in Persian and Arabic. And next slide, please. And here is a fragment of the Torah in Judeo-Persian translation. It's Leviticus 11, and it describes the kosher slaughtering of animals. And if you want, you can go to the National Library of Israel's website and see more of these examples for yourself. There's an English version of the website. But now we're going to get started with a tour in a geographic way. And so the first city that we're going to visit is Balch. And if we could have the next slide. Now, this slide shows the ancient region of Khorasan. And for me, it is a better way to understand the culture and history of this part of the world. The Jews of Afghanistan are part of a cultural continuum that stretches from Mashhad to Herat, Marv, Bukhara, and Samarkand. It's not a series of edges of empires, but rather it has its own center. Sayed Askar Musavi argues that it's better to think of the non-Pashtun peoples of Afghanistan through this lens. But please take a look at the reference of this map. It comes from Osnat's online exhibition, The Hidden World of Afghan Jews. If you could go to the next slide. So here we are in Balch. Balch is in the far northern part of Afghanistan. And it's the most ancient home of the Jewish people. We believe that Jews went from Babylonia to Khorasan and then following the Silk Road. But the Jewish population seems to have grown significantly after the Muslim conquest in 670, and especially into the 700s and 800s. Under Caliph Harun al-Rashid in the 800s, Jews were known as tribal mediators. They would negotiate between tribes and were considered neutral. This pattern actually continued all the way until the 20th century. And Jews went from Balch to Bukhara, and they also settled in Marv, Ghazna, Herat, Nishapur, and Samarkand. Like the modern community, the ancient Jewish community was based on commerce. And it even helped to support the Babylonian yeshivot. We know that Arab geographers referred to a Bab al-Yahud, a Jew's gate. And then there was a town called Yahudan or Yahudiya, which was halfway between Marv and Balch, which was later renamed as Maimana by the Muslims, the fortunate or auspicious town. So Balch was a really important center of the Eastern Islamic world. It was known for orchards, horse breeding, minerals, but also free thinkers and heretics. The area rebelled against Abbasid rule and mainstream Islam, and there were many religions present: Buddhism, Sunni and Shia Islam, Nestorian Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and traditional religions. There were also Karaites and other dissenting Jewish voices. Ben Zion Yehoshua Raz, who is an important Afghan Jewish scholar in Israel, and whose work I have also used significantly in this speech today, in this tour today. He said that Sadia Gaon called the Jews in Balch Nivdalei Bnei Israel, or breakaway children of Israel, like people who are only called Jews. Like maybe today we would say so-called Jews. And so you can see from long ago, we still had lots of divisions. Out of this milieu in Balch came a man named Hiwi al-Balchi, Hiwi from Balch, the most famous ancient Afghan Jew. In the second half of the 9th century, he critiqued the Bible in 200 rhyming questions. A copy of his work doesn't remain, but we have Sadia Gaon's polemic against him, which was also refuted in rhyme. And in fact, Vera Maureen, another historian, argues that his early, quote, scriptural criticism forced Jews, Muslims, and Zoroastrians into an early form of interreligious discourse. So he was influenced by all these different religions and perspectives, and he was highly critical of the Bible. He said that God was not omniscient, omnipotent, good, or just, but rather God is just merciless, inconsistent, and changeable, and that the Bible is full of absurdities, contains unreasonable stories and commandments, contradicts itself, often anthropomorphizes God, and even admits to the existence of many gods. And this is a quote from Marzena Zawandoska in the Encyclopedia of Jews in the Islamic World. So this is what was going on when Afghanistan was really at the center of the world. But then the Mongols arrived in 1220, and they extinguished all of this luminescence, the bright shining light that was ancient Afghanistan. It took hundreds of years for Afghanistan to recover, and in some ways it didn't. Very few signs of Jewish life are present for the next 500 years. We know that a small community did survive, but there is just limited evidence. It's believed that some Jews in Khorasan ended up in Kaifeng in China, as there are Judeo-Persian slichot in Chinese archives, according to Ben-Zion Yehoshua Raz. But now if we could please turn to the next slide. Great. So where the story of the modern story of Jewish Afghanistan really starts again is in the 18th century, when in 1736, some Jews, along with Hindus and Armenians, were settled in Kabul and Mashhad by Nadir Shah Afshari as a way to encourage trade between Persia and India. Religious minorities could lend money, which helped to facilitate commerce, something that Muslims were forbidden to do. So under Ahmed Shah, 250 Jews came from Mashhad to Kabul. A British missionary who was actually born Jewish, his name is Joseph Wolfe. He arrived in Kabul in 1832, and he said that there were about 50 Jewish families in a synagogue in Kabul. It was a small community. And Herat, in contrast, had maybe between 20 to 40 families. But then in 1839, everything changed. This was when the entire Jewish community, 2,400 people in Mashhad in northeastern Iran, were forcibly converted to Islam. The incident became known as Al-Adad, or God gave. And this community was never allowed to return to an open practice of Judaism in Persia, but they maintained a secret practice. They were completely successful conversos. Mashhadis are the only known Jewish community in the world who were forcibly converted to another religion, and they all returned. No one was left behind. What happened was there was a rumor that the Jews had insulted the Prophet Muhammad, and a riot commenced in March of 1839. Dozens were killed in a few hours, and in order to stop a massacre, the Muslim religious leaders intervened and said that the Jews would convert. So they were called Jadid al-Islam, or New Muslims. And let's see. And so after the conversion, the Mashhadi community divided into two groups. There were those who are known as Talibin al-Islam, students of Islam, and they remained in Mashhad until the middle of the 20th century. They were wealthier crypto Jews, they had close connections to Muslims, and they often took Persian names. They went to the mosque frequently and traveled on pilgrimage to Karbala and Mecca. And sometimes they would stop in Jerusalem on the way back. They would invite Shia dignitaries into their homes, and some even became important officials of the great mosque of Imam Reza. Now, the other group was known as the Mitasibin, or the angry ones, and they performed the minimum of Islamic rituals necessary to avoid suspicion of their neighbors. They were poor and very devout, and so consequently, they left Mashhad fast, and they fled into the northern desert. And this flight begins the beginning of the more substantial Jewish community in Afghanistan. Maybe 2/3 of the community left Mashhad by the mid-1840s. Some joined Turkmen tribes who were fighting against the Persians and the Emir of Bukhara, while others took refuge with neighboring Jewish communities in Deregez, Khiva, and Bukhara. In Afghanistan, they settled in Kabul, Balkh, Tashkurgan, and especially Herat. And so maybe 300 of the 700 Mashhadi families immigrated to Herat. And so they quickly outnumbered the native Herati Jewish population and were probably 5/6 of the population in Herat. Jews, unfortunately, were only safe in Herat for about 15 years. But in 1856, the Persian army laid siege to the city. And as the army was retreating in 1857, the entire Jewish community, Jadid al-Islam and longtime resident, were put into chains and their property was looted, and they were marched from Herat to Mashhad, which today, according to Google Maps, is an 80-hour walk. It took 3 weeks. And they were imprisoned in an abandoned caravanserai. And about 300 or 400 died in the first year, and far more would have died if it weren't for the surreptitious and very dangerous actions of the Mashhadi Jadid community, who risked their lives to feed the imprisoned Herati Jews. 2 years later, 2 Mashhadi emissaries went to the Shah of Persia and pleaded for their release. Now listen to their names. It's really interesting. The first one's name is Karbilai Ismail Dilmani. So that shows that he went on pilgrimage to Karbala. And the second man's name is Aga Abderrahman Aharon. So you can see the influence of both Islam and Judaism on their names and their experiences. Anyway, at that point, the Heratis were allowed to return to Mashhad upon paying of basically a bribe, well, a ransom to the Persian government and a bribe to the governor of Khorasan. After they returned home and they tried to rebuild their lives, the Jews of Herat also endured a series of pogroms in 1863, in 1871, 1879, 1881, 1885, again and again and again. And after each time, the Jadidis in Mashhad would help the Heratis rebuild their lives. But the second half of the 19th century was a very difficult time for the community in Afghanistan. And synagogues collapsed in Herat, Maimana, and Balkh due to neglect and due to people fleeing. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. So because of all the difficulties of living in settled areas, some Jews decided to leave those, and they joined Turkmen tribes, or at least they settled with Turkmen, where they found far less prejudice. The image on the left-hand side is actually very recent. It's a dance troupe, and it comes from Ashgabat, is a sister city to Albuquerque, and this is I believe this is a dance group that actually came to New Mexico recently. And then, of course, on the left side is a much older image of Turkmen. So even before 1839, the relationship between these two communities were very warm. But after the forcible conversion of the Mashhadis, the connections deepened. Some Jews fled into the desert, and they even joined Turkmen tribes and fought against the Persians and the Bukharans. In fact, one commentator at that time, one author at that time said, I think it's Joseph Wolf, and he said that you could hear the Hebrew war cry, Rabbonei Shel Olam, Lord of the world, along with that of the Turkmen war cry, Serenk, which meant brave. And Joseph Wolf also said that Jews who are tyrannized over at Bukhara and Persia fly to the inhabitants of the desert, at Marv, Sarax, Akko, and to the Hazara in Afghanistan. So it's interesting because Turkmen were particularly disliked by both Persians and Bukharans, as they were caravan robbers, and they also enslaved both Shia and Sunni Muslim travelers, and they would sell them to slave traders in Bukhara. As a result, so the Turkmen who were actually traders were at constant risk of revenge from the prisoners' relatives. So Jews provided a neutral buffer between the Turkmen and other Muslims, and they were considered honest brokers who also helped to provide most of the goods and services that the tribes needed. And Turkmen would not enslave Jews because they needed mediators, and they also had according to one traveler in 1864, Arminius Bambari, who wrote Travels in Central Asia, Turkmen had a superstitious fear of Jews because they were reputed to be sorcerers and magicians. Later, when the Turkmen area became part of the Russian Empire, and Russians wanted to banish Jewish immigrants from Turkestan Krai, 800 leaders of the Turkmen tribes in Ashgabat petitioned the Russians to allow the Jews to stay. They explained that the Turkmen were close to the Herati and Mashhadi Jews, and that they did business without any receipts, as there was full trust between the communities. We find that also that same idea also occurs and that 30 and 40 years later in Afghanistan. We hear almost the exact same phrase from British commentators who say that there was absolute trust between these communities and they worked together very well. So yes, but I want you to also look at this older picture on the right-hand side, and you'll see the hats that the Turkmen are wearing, and they're made of caracal skin. Now, this became Afghanistan's most important source of foreign earnings in the early 20th century. But the reason why they were able to have these earnings is because Turkmen shepherds were fleeing from the Soviet Union, the beginning of the Soviet Union. They came into Afghanistan and they worked with Jewish merchants to sell when they were selling their crop, their herd. And so again, we see that there was a lot of connections between them. Yes, and so what I also just want to say, one last thing, the Jewish community was able to be economically successful because of these strong inter-ethnic ties. And in the 1930s, when Jews were officially banned from the caracal fur trade in Afghanistan, also the Turkmen shepherds suffered greatly. And let's go to the next slide. So this is the Yohav Synagogue of Herat. And Osnat, would you like to talk a little bit about this?
Hi, everyone. My name is Osnat, and I am from Afghan Jewish ancestry. This is a photo of modern synagogue. It's actually not a synagogue anymore. It's a school in Kabul, in Herat, which was called Yohav Synagogue. And it was built in the late 1800s by the local Jews. It houses about 200 sittings. It's a very beautiful place inside. And the Aga Khan Foundation actually preserved the building. As you can see, it's very modern. And they kept the center of the synagogue intact as it was originally done. It's a very beautiful place now as it was 200 years ago. Or maybe 100 years ago.
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you, Osnat. Can we go to the next slide? So these are some images of the courtyard, Osnat, as you described. And
this is a version of the synagogue. What it looks like today. It's actually a school for girls.
can we go to the next slide?
This is the inside of the synagogue. As you can see, the beautiful paintings, and you can see the ark also, which was preserved, which is very, it's a wonderful, because the Aga Khan Foundation kept the synagogue intact. It's to its original, to its originality. I can't see because there's so much going on, but it is, as you can see from the colors, and I think it was the same color used at that time. The Afghans are known for very colorful clothing, carpets, and artifacts.
Great.
So
Thank you so much. Can we go to the next slide? So it's not, this is a synagogue that became a mosque.
yes, the picture on the left is on the new one, the rebuilt one. I think the right picture is the inside of the synagogue, and it still looks like some semblance to the old synagogue. And we are very thankful that they preserved all the original, paintings and structure of the buildings. And they still called by their original names, even though they're Jewish names and there's no Jews in Afghanistan, but they still called the name of the original synagogue. They kept all the names.
Wow. So thank you. So let's go to the next slide, please. And then this is
this is another synagogue. We had actually 4 Jewish synagogues in Herat. They had about 1,000, a little bit more than maybe 2,000 people. I don't really know the numbers. I don't remember. And but they had 4 synagogues, and they were named after the rabbis that ordained the rabbis that actually ran the synagogue. I think the left picture is actually today. I think this man is probably a local Afghan that I don't know. Sarah, what is it today? A school or a mosque?
I believe this one is a school. Though there's only one of the 4 synagogues is a mosque, so the rest are schools.
Okay, so this one is a school. I think the previous Galaki turned into a mosque, so this is a boys' school, and this is not as elaborately built, not as beautiful as the Yohav, and but it's still kept in the traditional name, the traditional Jewish name, and they also kept, I think, the bima intact. As you can see, it's raised off the floor.
Looks
and
like
I mean, I'm not, I think this is, I'm very proud of what they've done to the Jewish. Yes.
Very wonderful. And Mira, if you could go to the next slide. So this is another view of the same synagogue. And then let's go on to the next one. And this may be the Mullah Asher synagogue, but we're not quite sure. We're not.
Well, the left one looks like the Yohav synagogue. You see, with the same arc and the windows.
Mm.
And I think the inside is the where the arc is all the way in the back. I think it's an old photo. I think these are old photographs. Is the Mullah Asher synagogue the one that's in ruin?
It's been abandoned. It's the one that's it's the one that's currently abandoned.
So I think
We're not sure.
Yeah, old photos of the years ago. There are no Jews in Herat since 1970s or 50s. I'm sorry, I'm not up to date.
It's been for quite some time. There haven't been Jews in Herat. I think since the mid 50s. Let's go to the next slide because we're already halfway through our time. So this is the mikveh that was at the Yohav synagogue.
Today, I don't know if you have a modern picture of the mikveh today. It's beautiful. They have created a very beautiful mikveh, and we were actually reached out to help them fix it. And that's how I met the people in Herat that were actually fixing it. And today it's a very beautiful, it looks like a hole, but they have built it in the beautiful room, and it's actually working now.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your hard work with that.
Thank you.
So now we're going to keep going, Mira. So this is the bathhouse or the mikveh. This is another image from the one that functioned in Herat's Bazaar. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some of the implements that were used for washing. And let's go to the next one. So this is the Kabul synagogue. And we were amazed to see that this plaque is dedicated in memory of one of your relatives.
Which I didn't know, which was surprising. wonderful that you showed me yesterday. Actually, my father's uncle,
Wow.
who actually passed in Kabul, and he came to my grandfather passed, and then he came from Herat to gather his body. So his children made a plaque, and I'm wonderfully surprised that it's still on.
Amazing. It's totally
Amazing.
amazing. So let's go to the next image. So this is the modern images of the Kabul synagogue. On your right, you can see Zevulon Simantov, who declared himself the last Jew of Afghanistan until we found another Jew, until another Jew was found, Tova Moradi. And then there's a lot of new building around the Kabul synagogue. Osnat, do you want to add anything?
We don't know the status of the synagogue today. We're trying to find out, and we just don't know. I think the building is in ruin, and we're trying to find out. We just really don't know. Zvulon is on the other side. He built a restaurant on the first floor, and the second floor was his residence as well as the synagogue. And he had many visitors throughout his lifetime in Afghanistan, from reporters to dignitaries. From many people came to see him because he was like a phenomenal. He was, but now he is in Turkey trying to get to Israel.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? And these are some images of a synagogue in the 1970s, children and a Havdalah service. Let's keep going. And this in the synagogue with people at prayer in 1972. And you can see the niches in the wall and the bima in the center. Let's keep going. Now, these are pictures of your family members.
Yeah. So these are my parents, actually. The left one is my mom and my dad, and you can see she's wearing John Lennon glasses, very modern. This is 1940s. My father is wearing the carpool hat, but my mom is also driving on the right side. She's on the bike, and she is driving in the Palmon Gardens, which was like the Hamptons of New York. People would go there for the summer to rest and, you know, enjoy themselves with the friends. So this is from that period.
And the gardens are very interesting in that under Zahir Shah, when Zahir Shah himself wanted to visit the gardens, all the Muslims would have to leave, but the Jews were allowed to stay. So as the king would stroll through them, he would ask Jewish schoolboys if they were having any trouble or if they were being bullied. And the king told children to report any incident to him. One woman who I interviewed, her name is Leah Deal. She remembers, greeting the king, and she would make elaborate trays of sweets for the royal family on occasion of their children's marriages. And she recalls that the king said, "As long as I am king, you will be protected." And in fact, her family left after 1973 when he was deposed. But I just thought that was really interesting.
They had a very good relationship with the king, the Jews. I don't know if this is part of the exhibition, but many of the Afghans feel that they are related. They are Bnei Israel, and they feel that they are related to the Jews, and they still do. And the king felt that he was also part of the Bnei Israel. Of course, they were Muslims, but they felt that they were Jews that came to Afghanistan after King Solomon's reign. I don't remember the years, and then they created the country, the name Afghana, which is actually a name of King Shaul's son.
Exactly.
So Afghanistan is named after him. this is the history. We don't have any notes of, that it's a true story. This is what they believe, but that's it.
Thank you. And can we go? Thank you so much. And so here's a slide of men who are barbecuing. And this is also from Osnat's family photos. And if we could go to the next one.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I actually am going to stop the share and
Okay.
redo it just
Okay.
because I had someone indicate they couldn't see. So I just want to make sure. Okay, so am I good? I'm good to go to the next slide.
Yes, please. Okay, so these are some images of daily life and women's experiences. And on the left side is an Osnat's family photo. And the women are, I'll just talk a little bit about women's lives and then I'll turn it over to Osnat. So women's lives were very circumscribed. They seldom left their courtyard, let alone the Jewish quarter. They didn't visit their parents very frequently and would only leave the mahalla or the neighborhood several times a year, generally to picnic or visit gardens, especially in the days after Passover and Shavuot. However, they differed from Muslim women in that they mixed freely with the men in their homes. In the streets, they wore a dark blue burqa to avoid trouble, but Muslim women wore a white burqa. So Jewish women were instantly recognizable, and thus they were very vulnerable. And women's lives revolved around household chores that were often performed communally in the courtyard, like grinding flour, cooking, baking, and washing, as well as spinning, sewing, embroidery, and knitting. They made objects for domestic purposes and festivals and ceremonial occasions. And they really concentrated on making the items for their daughters' trousseaux. And sewing was also a social occasion to prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Passover, when all family members would receive new outfits. And Osnat, do you want to tell us anything?
Yes, so the picture on the left is 1940s, early 1940s. It's a group of women who were friends from very early age until they actually died. They even came together to the United States, and they were always socially very connected. And they are actually dressed in Afghan outfits. It's sort of a fun thing that they did. I think it's still in the garden of Parman. And my mom is the second person from the right. The picture on the left is in 1950s from Herat. And this is a Jewish family. And you can see the women are basically covered up. And you can't see their faces. But also the Jewish women were very well dressed. And also they had beautiful jewelry. I think Sarah has a few pictures with the jewelry of them. And you can see from the outfits on the right side that the headband on the woman on the left is very beautifully embroidered, and partly there's a jewel. She's wearing probably a gold necklace. So they had a very rich life. They also dealt with the local merchants because most of their husbands were traveling on business. So the women would go into the market and buy the food and what was necessary. They had and they were also very strong women. Even though we think of Muslim women as more submissive, but the Jewish women were much more involved with their family upbringings, the children, decisions of moving or living, and the men were just very supportive of the women. I guess the picture in the middle is a Jewish woman wearing a dark burqa.
Yes.
So this is how they walked in the street.
Thank you.
And one more thing, the children, when they walked in the street, the children would be under the burqa walking with them.
Wow.
Because they couldn't take the children outside. Many of the children would be kidnapped. So my aunt told me that she would walk with her mom inside the burqa.
Wow. That's amazing as a way to protect them from being kidnapped.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's Well, but they had a good life. According to my family, they were very happy people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's go to the next slide. Can I go to the next slide? Oh dear. There we go. Okay. So this is a courtyard. This is a courtyard of a family in Herat in 1973. Oh, so there's still Jews in Herat in 1973. So we got that wrong. But most of the life of the family, of the women and children, took place in the home. And in Herat, between 3 and 7 nuclear families would share one large household that where there was 2 or 3 stories, who would 2 or 3 stories home that where people would live on the north side on the ground floor in the summer, and they'd live on the south side in the second or the third floor in the winter to help with either heat or cold. And there would be a courtyard with a well, storage rooms for food, firewood, a garden, a chicken coop, and sometimes even a shed for cows or sheep. Men would buy large quantities of staple foods that would be stored in adobe silos. And oftentimes the homes were built so close together that it was possible to pass from the roof of one to another without even going down on the street. And so let's go to the next slide, so again, this is a picture that Osnat has a family connection to. It's the bar mitzvah of a 13-year-old of a child in the Gul family in Kabul in 1948. And Osnat, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about it.
So as you can see, it's very similar to today's bar mitzvah. You see the talit on him, you see the family surrounding him. We have pictures of today that, my nephews and nieces got bat mitzvah, and it's very similar. The same sort of setting. The family would be there, and it would be a very happy occasion like we celebrate today. Again, my mom's family was Gul, so they were related to this gentleman who is still alive. He lives in Milano. His name is Moshe Gul, a very successful man, and very also helps many of the Jewish causes. So he is 13. He was his bar mitzvah was celebrated here. I recognize many of the people here. My mom is included, and my uncle, and probably my grandmother. And what's amazing, these pictures are so clear. I mean, Sarah, did you Photoshop them? Because they're
Actually, Mira helped with this one.
No, it's because it's wonderfully very clear. You can see the faces, and you see different outfits. Also, many of the men had to go to Bukhara to get married because there were not many women in Afghanistan. For some reason or another, they had more men than women. So many of the men would go to Bukhara and marry Jewish women. So you can see in this picture that the Jewish women from Bukhara kept their custom. So you see this woman in white. She's wearing a Bukharian outfit, and she's probably the grandmother of the boy. There's another woman wearing the Bukharian. It's the hats with a scarf. My mom is the third woman from the left. My uncle is the third man from the top row. And then you see the children on the bottom. And then you see there are many, like this man, there's a man wearing a suit. These people are wearing suits, very modern in 1940s in Afghanistan, to wear a jacket and a suit and a tie. We were always very fascinated how they learned to wear this type of clothing. They had no outside outlets to get these clothing. They probably just made them from pictures. So you see very modern photo of people in 1940s that are wearing suits and ties and very nice clothing.
Sure, thank you so much. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a picture of work. Actually, Osnat, your father is on the right-hand side.
Mm.
And he was traveling to Peshawar then.
No, this is in Kabul.
Oh,
I
it's in
think
Kabul.
it's a snow. I think it's a snowy.
Okay.
You can see the snow. They're wearing coats, so it was cold.
Yeah, it's awfully cold.
Yeah. This is. I don't know when they traveled to,
So it's- yeah.
but yeah, that's an old photo.
So work for Jews in Afghanistan was was basically centered in trade. You can see the picture on the left is a caracal lamb, caracal sheep, as well as carpet, colored gemstones still remains important for community members today, including us not. Core members of the community were peddlers who sold their goods in rural areas and served as intermediaries with the tribes. Members of the middle class were merchants who imported textiles and medicines and exported skins, furs, and carpets. But then it could be difficult with the amount of competition from the Hindu community, who are also another entrepreneurial minority at the time, along with Hindus, Armenians, and Jews. And so Jews became shopkeepers, doctors, druggists, and distillers. And so those were traditional sources of employment. And also it's really important, was not mentioned how the women were very strong and they took a really important role in the family, and they would go into the street and buy what needed to be bought as well. And that maybe also because the Jewish community in Afghanistan was kind of shaped by the way that men would engage in long distance trade.
Yeah.
Jewish merchants would go to remote regions and sold goods to feuding tribes. Sometimes they would be the only ones allowed in disputed areas. And they went on these incredible journeys into Russia, into Europe, into India, and they would be gone for a long period of time. So women were on their own in the cities in Herat and Kabul.
They would be absent for sometimes for over a year, and would come back for the next holiday.
Exactly. So women really had to have a lot of self-sufficiency. Let's go to the next slide. So you see some ritual objects. This is a Seder plate and Shabbat lights, and they would put oil into the small bowls and then light the wick. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's go to the next one. On the left-hand side, you see Shabbat candles, and on the center is Havdalah, and on the right-hand side is a challah cover. Let's keep going. This on the top, you see a Hanukkah, and the yads, as well as the challah cover. And I know let's keep going. Some traditional Rosh Hashanah foods, especially the head of a sheep and lungs, a lamb head and lungs, as well as pomegranate seeds and apples and honey and dates and beans, as well as the Yom Kippur whip. Let's keep going. These are images for Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And as you can, there's the quince and the pomegranate are both decorated. Oh, and as far as in Yom Kippur, the whip was used for men who would do that to themselves, I think. Was that? We have a question about that.
I honestly, I was not aware of that.
Oh, okay. Well, let's keep going.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. We're running out of time, so I just want to go a little quicker. And here you see the Hanukkah and sweet fried bread. Okay, and let's keep going. Okay, Tu B'Shvat and Purim. You can see the men in Kabul in 1966. Halva on the right-hand side. And on the left, Osnat, could you explain this tray for Tu B'Shvat?
Well, they had Tu B'Shvat is celebrated throughout the world, all the Jews, and it's common. Is it 7 dried food and 7 fresh food? And this is a beautiful plate of showing how how it's displayed. My parents would always have that on the table during that holiday.
Thank
And
you.
the halva homemade, I miss it because Sarah showed it to me yesterday. And I said, wow, I forgot about it. It was very delicious, very sweet though, but delicious. Homemade.
Let's go to the next slide. So for Pesach, these are traditional. There's the haroset on the top right hand side, the implements for making matzah, fried fish and scallions. And the scallions were important. It was not because the participants in the Seder would hit each other with them?
Yes, Dayenu, doing the song of Dayenu, the kids loved it because they had an opportunity to hit their parents and all the anger coming out with the scallion. It's a very big event. It's I think the most important event for the kids to sit through. So,
oh, my goodness. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Modegol, Shavuot. Okay. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, and then this is an idea, it's a sponge. It's you're right, where it's a roux that's burnt. And was not you have your mother used to do this sometimes?
We used to do that. I still do. I buy it from an grocery store. And even though it's not a Jewish tradition, because my mom would do it, she said, it's not Jewish. But I think it's more of an Islam tradition because we spoke about it with.
Yes.
And yeah, and she mentioned, she came up with it. And I said, yes, of course, I forgot. And so it's one, and she has the flour, which I never knew. It's actually the little seeds that come from this flour, and we put it on the burner, and it has to like pop on a hot heat, and then we make a prayer for all the bad eye. It's against the evil eye. So when you have things going bad in a certain period of time in your life, so we would just use it. I think it was more psychological than actual, and I still do it. So I have to say that every time I do it, I feel better and things go away. So I don't know if it actually works or not, but
feels better. And it came all the way from Zoroastrianism. Let's go to the next slide. So brides were very young, and they could be as young as between ages 9 to 14 in the 19th century. These are some images from 1875, and then on the right-hand side, again in 1935 in Mashhad. And Osnat, your grandmother was 9 when she was married?
My grandmother was 9 years old, and we were always fascinated with that story. And but she would tell us, I did not have sex with him until I got my period. And I'm sorry to use the word, but that's she would tell us. So right. The men had to be patient with these women, these young girls, until they got their period, and then they would be able to consummate their marriage. So, and she fell asleep during her wedding. That's what she told us.
My goodness. So that was a way of protecting girls from Muslims who wanted to marry them.
Well, somebody else asked who was kidnapping them. There was a lot of kidnapping by Muslim men of the Jewish women. I don't think they had enough women in Afghanistan. For some reason or another, it seems that both Jews and Afghans did not have women. So they would kidnap young women, and so they had to marry the women. Actually, they would be betrothed at the age of 3 and 4 between cousins. Right. So they would not be able to kidnap, and then they would actually get married by the age of 9. They were very young. I don't think they were aware of what's going on.
Right, exactly. And let's go to the next slide. So this is an image of a chicken that would be given to the bride as a way of, during Purim as a way of, it's sort of like a toy, a pet. And that's something that she would keep with her until the birth of her first child. Maybe we can go quickly through some of these slides. These are some other images from 1963. As you can see, by then, women are far older when they're married, late adolescence, early 20s. Sugar bowl is very important part of wedding ceremonies for both Muslims and Jews. And the sugar cones would be hit together and the pieces distributed to the people who were celebrating the wedding. Let's keep going. Here's a trousseau. There's a coal. There's a container for coal for eyeliner. The clothing that was prepared for the wedding, and a trunk for a dowry. Let's just go through a little bit quickly. And these are applying special makeup during the wedding ceremony. It was a henna ceremony as well as special makeup and let's keep going. And then these are some of the scarves that were made. Each family would make these wedding shawls.
Yes, the women that was supposed to be, the brides would make it, and she would wear it as a veil.
Wow. And then the one on the left is for men, and let's keep going. And then this came from an exhibit and a book called Brides and Betrothals that was shown in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem in 1997. So these are reenactments of a traditional Afghan wedding. Keep going. And we have some wedding jewelry, and you can see all the different, you can see Persian, Russian, and Indian and Central Asian influences.
Would it be okay for me to chime in here?
Please.
This is what was so interesting to me organizing this tour for my Jewish learning and learning more with Osnat and Sarah, because you can so see the confluence of influences from Mughal India or Islamic India, Central Asia, and Qajar Iran, so present in the beauty standards and the traditions that are here. Even the interaction between Russian Empire and Afghan Jews is present in the fact that there is a use of cloisonné and enameling on the back of the chita, the wedding jewelry. So it's just it's really an area of the world that I didn't know a lot about. I just want to thank Sarah and Osnat for being part of this experience and talking about how these communities we're literally marrying these elements together to create a new and resilient culture. So
thank you so much.
I just want to say that is absolutely so, because we have the jewelry from that period and it is magnificent. It was all handmade. It's it's still very modern. And I'm glad you noticed it. It's just beautiful. Also in all the artifacts, in their Jewish, traditional religious pieces and the housewares, the clothing, you can see they were really integrated with a lot of different nationalities and tribes.
It's amazing. Do we have time to just go through quickly the rest of the slides to see the images? So this is.
That should be okay. I'll start the video, but I'm gonna make it really, really.
Oh no, we don't even have
we
to.
don't need to do that?
We could
Okay, gotcha.
just see the images. So Osnat, this is a wedding of your mother's friend.
Yes, this is another wedding. And you see the Bukharian traditional clothing here. Many of the women are wearing them. And the Afghan women, they were born in Afghanistan, actually a citizen, or they're not citizen, but they were actually, they called Afghans. They wear more modern clothing. The men are wearing suits. Some of the men are wearing the traditional armor, jackets that's more traditional. So it was very mixed nationalities until today. We still have people asking if you are Bukharian or Afghan.
Right. Thank you. Can I go to the next one? And then I just wanted to, these are some pictures that are found in the American Sephardi Federation archives, taken by Ziva Olbaum in 1976 in Herat and Kabul, just to give a sense of how the people looked. The end of the community, if we could go through them. It seems to be one family in their home, and the 3 generations. Okay, keep going. You can see the wood burning stove, and then on the right hand side is a man studying in the synagogue in Kabul. And if we can keep going. And then this is the courtyard in one of the Herati synagogues. Keep going. And then, I don't know if we have,
Probably we don't have time.
do we have time, Mira, for us not to talk about preserving Herat Cemetery?
Yeah, I know that honestly, part of me wishes we did like a part 1 and part 2, but I absolutely want to pay attention and honor Osnat's incredible work in restoring the cemetery. So if it's okay, I'd like to conclude here and have Osnat share.
Thank you.
We had a very old synagogue in Herat, actually about 500 years old, and there are about 2,000 graves, and it was in a very bad, it was like sort of a piece of land, and nobody knew what it was, so people started taking parts of it to build homes, because it also, that area turned to be a much more affluent area, and more wealthy people started moving there. So they started taking, not maliciously, but because they didn't know what it was. So when the men, Salajuddin reached out to me about the mikvah in the Yoav synagogue, I asked him to go to the cemetery and check how it is. And he came back and he said it's really very bad. And we were very fortunate that he built four walls, solid walls. And here you see the construction, and you see, and then my friend from Canada, Shlomo Yakutiel, went and he built actually tombstones on wherever a stone was laid. So it was it took us about 10 years, and it was a lot of work, but it's really safe now. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your incredible work to preserve the Jewish legacy in Afghanistan. Where
it just fell into our lap. We were very lucky.
Yes, absolutely. So Mira, what's next?
I'm wondering if maybe it's a good idea just to take 1 or 2 questions. If I had to put my finger on the ones that were the most common questions were about women's lives. And also there was one that was interesting that was about rabbinic, like how were rabbis trained? What did the yeshivot look like? And another one that was a lot of questions about women in the synagogue, women's religious lives and participation. We even have one here that's like, did women play music with men? So I'd honestly love to talk about that because I think it's important.
I just say something about the women. The women follow, the men and women in Afghanistan follow the traditional orthodoxy separation between men and women. So they would be in a separate room or away from the men's section in the synagogue. And whenever they had a party, they would also be separated, dance with just women, and men would dance with men. So this is the traditional Orthodox Jewish, separation between men and women. The women, the Afghan women, for some reason, turned out to be very strong. We don't know why, because most of the Muslim women are much more submissive, but maybe because their husbands were away for a very long period of time. The men had to be traveling for about a year and then come back a year later. So they were not part of the family, and they had to raise the children, make sure the food, the clothing, everything was there. So they had basically ruled the household, and they did not have yeshivot. They had the school, the cheder, like the old Jewish traditions, and they would only have one book or one siddur, and everybody had to learn reading Hebrew upside down because they did not have enough Jewish books to study. They were also, they had to memorize everything because they didn't have the books, so they would have to learn how to sing the songs and the prayers by memory. And it was also a very close community. Everybody was intermarried. They had most of the people married their cousins or second cousins, and so many of the families were very close and lived together. And just until today, they're very close. So like I probably have like 200 cousins. So there was another question about men marrying, Jewish men marrying. Yes, they were able to marry second wives, even though they had a first wife. My grandfather married a second woman while he was married to my grandmother. So it was acceptable. I'm sorry, what other question were there?
About yeshivot, and well, the rabbis who came from mostly the Gargi family.
Yeah, the Gargi was a very famous Gul. I think there's Gargi, and Gul was also another one. Rabbi Yoav Simantov is the one that's named after the synagogue. He was, and they had very limited access to the international Jews. They basically were contained in a box. And even though the men would travel elsewhere and they would bring some books or clothing or pictures, but the women and the children were just closed, neat, and they had no outside access to the Jewish life elsewhere. But they kept and preserved their Jewish life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, so.
Even though we couldn't get to some parts of our presentation where we also kind of touched on the modern Afghan Jewish community, I'm so grateful that people came to this, and maybe we'll do a Q&A part 2. I'll talk more about it. Thank you so much, Asnat and Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you for putting it together.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mira. And thank you, My Jewish Learning.
And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. A recording will be sent out to everyone, and you will be able to find it on the My Jewish Learning website. Safe travels and safe journeys to everyone who joined us here today at the crossroads of the Jewish world. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.